It's the first multi-party election in Ethiopia in more than 16 years. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is facing the electorate for the first time since taking office. But will democracy work even as some regions are left out of the vote? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed rose to power in 2018, promising a break with Ethiopia's authoritarian past. And the nation's first multi-party election in 16 years was held on Monday after being delayed twice because of the pandemic. The vote is Abe's first test at the ballot since his appointment. His governing Prosperity Party has fielded the most candidates, raising his chances of remaining on the job. But some opposition groups have boycotted the vote in protest against the jailing of their leaders. And some regions are not taking part for logistical or security reasons. Those who missed Monday's vote will get another chance in September. Abiy Ahmed has been under pressure for the conflict in the northern region of Tigray, where the UN has warned thousands are facing famine-like conditions. So, will Abiy Ahmed survive his first test at the ballot box? We'll put that to our guests. First, this report from Mohammed in Addis Ababa.
There are long queues outside almost every polling station in the capital, Addis Ababa. People have been streaming to polling stations hours before voting began. They're casting 3 ballots, one for a member of the local assembly, another for the House of Representatives, which is Ethiopia's main parliament, and the third one for members of the House of Federation, which is the upper house of Ethiopia's bicameral parliament. Now, these elections have been dogged with logistical issues in the past. It is the military that has helped the Electoral Commission transport polling materials to different parts of the country. But with the military now fully engaged in the war in Tigray, the Electoral Commission did not have that support available, which is one of the reasons why it asked for a delay, saying that they needed more time to prepare for the election. It was the second time the elections were postponed. Last year, the elections were put off because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, there are also legitimacy issues surrounding these elections. Will it have the desired effect, that of a democratic Ethiopia? Well, the jury is still out on that because there are a number of issues, one of them being opposition parties not fielding candidates in some parts of the country where they said not only were their supporters intimidated and imprisoned, but also some of them killed. There's also the issue of the Tigray region and the conflict there that is casting a very long shadow. When he came to power, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had styled himself as a Democrat and a leader who was going to usher in a new era of democracy in Ethiopia. Now, with the first elections he has organized, having all these issues, including observer missions like those from the European Union cancelling at the last minute, many people feel that these legitimacy issues will linger even in the post-election period. For Inside Story, this is Mohammed, Al Jazeera, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
So let's have a look at what's at stake in this election. The northern region of Tigray remains in a state of conflict 8 months after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered a military offensive there. The UN and humanitarian agencies say at least 350,000 people face famine in the region. Thousands have been killed and displaced, and the African Union is investigating allegations of rights abuses. The U.S. has imposed some sanctions on Ethiopian leaders in response to the Tigray crisis. Ethnic divisions have been growing, particularly between Ethiopia's 2 largest ethnic groups, the Amhara and Oromo. And Ethiopia is in a dispute with Sudan and Egypt for its hydroelectric dam on the Blue Nile. All right, let's bring in our guests. In Addis Ababa, Samuel Getachew is a journalist and writer. In Fort Myers, William Davison is senior Ethiopia analyst at the International Crisis Group. In The Hague, Adem Abebe is program officer at International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. A warm welcome to you all. Samuel, let me start with you today. How have people in Ethiopia viewed this election? I mean, do they actually see this as the beginning of a real transition to democracy?
You know, I woke up just after 5 to be at the polls, and the lineup I've seen, you know, it was supposed to start at 6. my polling station where I reside in. I can't vote because I don't hold an Ethiopian citizenship. But the fact is the lineup was long. People were excited. It's not going to be the most perfect election, but Ethiopia has never known an election that's perfect. But the people wanted to express their ideas. They wanted to highlight the issues that they care about. But I saw some kind of excitement among the many people that I met today and throughout the day.
Adem, let me get your viewpoint. You wrote a piece recently in which you said that many saw elections as harbingers of the success of the much touted transition. What about now? Do you feel the same?
Yes, I think for a lot of people, there's still a lot of hope that the elections will usher in a better dispensation, political dispensation. At the same time, they are not as they were hoped to be, primarily for two reasons. One, the unfolding conflict and tragedy in Tigray. Tigray region will not be participating in the elections. And secondly, is the fact that in Oromia, the key opposition parties are not participating. And what that means is that the electoral outcomes in Oromia will not be a genuine reflection of the political divides in the region. But at the same time, I think overall in the country, there is a sense that, as Samuel described, there's a sense of euphoria that these are important elections and that they will usher in a new dispensation, a better political dispensation in the country.
William, just how big of a test is this for Abiy Ahmed? I mean, he's never really faced the electorate before. So just, how much pressure is on him right now because of these elections?
I think for the reasons stated by Adem, there was not that much pressure on the Prime Minister here. The region, Ethiopia's most populous region is Oromia. It has the most federal constituencies, something like 178 out of 547, I believe. That was where the Prime Minister was expected to face his major electoral test, and indeed it's his home region. Now, the major opposition parties, as Adem said, have boycotted the election. Therefore, it seems almost that the Prime Minister's Prosperity Party will win by default in Oromia. So there are outstanding questions here. It will be interesting to see what share of the vote and of the seats the Prosperity Party wins in order to try and gauge its popularity. It will be very interesting to see the outcome of the election results in Addis Ababa, where there are a number of opposition parties who are still challenging the ruling party. But overall, this election as an actual real test of the Prime Minister and his agenda and his new ruling party, that is not as it should be because of that lack of competition in those key areas where he faces the most opposition and the biggest political challenge.
Samuel, I want to pick up on a point that Adem was making. He mentioned the conflict that's going on in Tigray. How much of a shadow is that war that's going on in Tigray casting on the election?
To be honest, I'm not trying to discount what's happening in the Tigray region. What's happening is really, really sad. But the fact is, it's not just in the Tigray region, it's all across the country. There are many parts of the country that I can't even access. We can't even access only because of security issues. What is a government if it cannot even provide basic security for Ethiopians or its citizens? So, Tigray is overshadowing. That's a fact. There are many people that are being impacted. What we have seen from afar, we can't even call them allegations anymore. They have been facts. They have been something that has been endorsed by even the Ethiopian government, the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, the UN. So what's happening in the Tigray region is something that needs our attention, not just the Ethiopian government. I think it needs everyone's attention. What lacks among Ethiopians is a real conversation about citizenship. There is this idea of embracing ethnic blocs, our ethnic backgrounds. I think this election, if it has any legacy, it needs to move forward. I know the election, there are some questions about how fair this election will be, but the reality is Ethiopians need to move forward because we don't want to see Ethiopia break up and become like we've seen in other countries, including our neighboring Somalia and South Sudan.
Adem, elections are not being held in around 1/5 of the country's 547 constituencies. That includes all 38 seats in Tigray and 64 others across the country. What are the reasons that elections either won't be held there or will be delayed?
It's a combination of, one, insecurity, especially in Tigray, but also in parts of Western Oromia and small parts of an Amhara region. But in other places, it's principally logistics and allegations of electoral mishaps, particularly in Somalia region, which is which is the fourth largest region in Ethiopia. So it's a combination of insecurity, of logistical challenge, and of electoral mishaps. But it's important to note that except for Tigray, elections in other parts, in the remaining parts, are planned for September. And if everything goes well, that will still be before the next parliament is supposed to start. So the delay is unfortunate in these areas, but it does not necessarily undermine the legitimacy of the elections. But what you said earlier and what Sam will try to cover is the fact that Tigray will be out of the elections, and we don't know for how long. And there has to be a way to ensure that the interest of the Tigrayans would be represented at the national level. So there has to be a mechanism for that to happen until elections are able to be held there.
William, why was the decision made to go ahead with elections when there are so many areas of the country where polls have been delayed for various reasons? Is this more about the fact that it would look like a failure after the elections having been delayed prior to this day, or is it more about the fact that it's an attempt for the Prime Minister and his party to consolidate power, or is it a combination of both?
Yes, combination of a number of things, I think. I mean, the ruling was that the authorities would run elections 9 to 12 months after the pandemic was considered to be under control. So there is a window to hold elections. There are opposition armed elements who've been excluded from this election, including in Oromia, the Oromo Liberation Army, which has grown in popularity and capabilities, it seems, since the formal opposition parties boycotted the election. Now, they are essentially trying to disrupt this process, which they say is illegitimate and conducted by illegitimate authorities. So, to cancel the election in the face of that sort of threat would be a submission to that sort of opposition activity. So it really does make sense to go ahead from the election from the federal authorities' perspective. Of course, the Prime Minister and his ruling party, they see a chance here to win a mandate, a formal democratic mandate, even if it lacks some popular legitimacy, and push ahead with their agenda. So I think those are the core reasons for pushing ahead with the vote. I just want to return to something that Samuel said. He's talking about the need for sort of healing ethnic divides in Ethiopia. When we talk about these excluded opposition entities, and when we talk about the opposition actors, either the Oromo Liberation Army or the armed resistance in Tigray, they are promoting an ethno-nationalist agenda. And this election, without apportioning blame, that this election is excluding those elements. So rather than this election bringing any sort of healing, any sort of answers to these divisions in Ethiopian society, instead it could quite possibly exacerbate them, because the parties that are participating in the election generally are the opponents of those more ethno-nationalist forces. And so that is the overarching concern that Crisis Group and many others have about the political situation in Ethiopia.
Samuel, let me ask you about what William was just mentioning. I mean, are you concerned that there is a reason to worry that these elections will further destabilize Ethiopia?
Sure, there might as well be, but the reality is this election was delayed so many times, twice at least. This is going to be a partial election unless Ethiopia moves beyond this election. I mean, we just have to move on, and because there are so many needs across the country. Again, there are many areas across the country that we can't even access. We've become citizens forced to reside in or among our ethnic groups. I highlight what William said. I know there are issues with this election. It's not the most perfect election. The opposition has been saying last year the Prime Minister should have conducted an election, some opposition groups. Now they're asking for it to be delayed once again. There are many that are not participating for many reasons. But the reality is, I think Ethiopians really want security. They need their basic needs to be met. And if this election would somehow produce results, I guess many people are saying, let it be.
Adem, you know, there are many analysts who've said that if tensions and conflicts around the country, you know, if that's already caused a rollback of Abiy Ahmed's reforms, that those rollbacks would continue. What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, there's always that chance. My sense is that once the elections are over, and as we expect the ruling party secures victory, they might feel more secure, more sensible. So the electoral calculations may change. That means that they might be ready to make concessions in Tigray and also with the Oromo opposition, and perhaps even with the international challenge, for instance, in relation to the GERD and others that the country is facing. But with elections hovering around, it's very difficult for the government to make concessions, particularly on some of the popular measures, including the conflict in Tigray and the conflict also in parts of Oromo. So I think there is a chance that the electoral outcomes may provide the government with some security, with some confidence, and also relieve it of the electoral calculations to engage in less popular but significant processes, including the issues that William raised. As he said, you know, the parties that are out of this process are unfortunately ethno-nationalist forces, and unfortunately also the elections are not supposed, and they are not meant to solve some of the contestations between, you know, on these issues. So there is hope that after the elections, and it's certainly my hope, after the elections, the government will feel more secure to engage with these forces, which would require dialogue, reconciliation, and overall mutual legitimacy between the ruling parties and the opposition.
William, you know, we've seen outside actors continue to try to push Abiy Ahmed into some type of conciliatory position to try to start a dialogue, to try to de-escalate tensions in the country. And then we've seen Abiy Ahmed continue to dig in his heels and really sort of rebuff those overtures. Let me ask you to expand on what Adem was saying. I mean, do you think that there's reason to be optimistic right now that if the election goes the way that many people think it will, and if Abiy Ahmed continues to be prime minister, if they, you know, locks his hold on power there, will there be a level of comfort to be able to be more conciliatory? I mean, are there any chances that there could be efforts made after this election to stop the conflict in Tigray and also deal with other crises throughout the country?
Sadly, I don't think there's grounds to be optimistic, but I would not. That does not mean I am dismissing the views or the suggestion along the lines of Adem's that it's sensible, it's worthwhile to wait and see what the government's reaction is, what the prime minister's reaction is in the event of securing a comfortable majority here. Is there going to be some recognition that the war in Tigray is essentially unwinnable, and it is just going to lead to continual human suffering with no prospect of a sustainable political settlement there? Is there going to be a recognition without some form of political amnesty, some effort to reach out to opponents, some efforts at political reconciliation, that Ethiopia's political problems are going to get worse, and that means more violent? I hope so, but I'm not particularly optimistic about it. And those concerns are based around a number of things. Recently, we have seen the TPLF, the ruling party in Tigray, classified as a terrorist organization. But the armed resistance in Tigray is fighting for the return of the TPLF government. That is a very hard political problem to resolve. And instead of reconciliation, it looks like we will see more conflict there. More generally, this is a process of the authorities and those that are loosely allied with them describing who are legitimate actors in Ethiopia and who are illegitimate political actors. Now, when you have an election, it will enhance those divisions. Those who participated in an election will be considered legitimate. Those who are engaging in any form of armed opposition activity, of course, will be classed as illegitimate post-election. There is the possibility for reconciliation and a change in direction, but unfortunately, I am not optimistic about that occurring.
Samuel, Abiy Ahmed's standing outside of Ethiopia has been greatly diminished since the war in Tigray began. What about inside Ethiopia?
I think, he's been prime minister for 3 years. He has a record. When you have a record past your honeymoon, political honeymoon, you become a wedge issue. There are those that do support him blindly sometimes, that do support the ongoing conflicts as a punishment to the TPLF era. And there are those that really despise what's happening across the country. Conflict has taken over the country, all across the country. There are issues of unemployment. There used to be a high interest of foreign investment. Some of them are going back. They're just packing up and going back. So there are many, many issues, and he has become a wedge issue. But if I may, let me talk about, today when I woke up at 5 a.m., went to the polls, looking at long lines of people, remind me of the hopeful year of South Africa in 93, 94. I just hope Ethiopia will have a true democracy where people can have confidence in the system. That's why people like me returned. I'm a diaspora from outside, so we can see that kind of hope in Ethiopia. I'm going to be hopeful, unlike William, and I hope this election will produce results for something for Ethiopia to move forward. When we can't have basic security in the country, that really diminishes our citizenship.
Adem, beyond these elections, how much of a challenge do issues like the border dispute with Sudan and the escalating tensions over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam pose for Abiy Ahmed and for the government?
I think the contestation over the dam it preceded Abiy Ahmed. The border dispute with Sudan is quite new. It was always there lurking in the background, but it has escalated significantly, particularly since the war started. My sense is that at the moment, any negotiation was always connected with electoral calculations of the ruling party. So even if they believe that concessions may be important, they would be hesitant because they do not want to disappoint their support base. So the GERD in particular is an extremely emotional issue in Ethiopia. The same with the border dispute in the country. And as I said, also the dispute in Oromia and also in Tigray. So these are extremely sensitive issues for any ruling party. So my sense and certainly my hope is that the fact that the electoral calculations would be over, that the elections would be over soon, could give them some breathing space to make gestures, important concessions and gestures. So very, very sensitive, very, very popular issues. And I hope that the relaxation of the tension could herald a better future for the country.
William, we only have about a minute, 30 seconds left. Let me just ask you, if Prime Minister Abiy is increasingly alienated from the international community, how much is that going to impact what goes on domestically in Ethiopia?
The big question is the international financing that the Ethiopian government is going to receive in the months and years to come to carry out its agenda, whether that's economic or political reforms or just general government activity. The tide is turning so fast against Ethiopia's government because of the horrors of the war in Tigray and the civilian suffering there, that there is considerable momentum building up in both the US and also in Europe for continued action unless the government changes course in Tigray. And as I've described, unfortunately, at the moment, although I am hopeful, I cannot be sort of rationally optimistic about a change in approach there, because at the moment there are just no signs of it.
All right, we have run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to all of our guests, Samuel Getachew, William Davison, and Adem Abebe. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.